All right. Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, and I share my process here live with you on the internet. But today, we're sharing one of my friend's processes. Jesse Mesa Toves, he was a guest earlier in the week and was sharing his comic project encoding Bushido. And now we're back. Last time, we spent time talking about Jesse's comic, and we didn't spend any time actually drawing. And as you guys know, what I usually like to do with these live streams is just have our computers on and our screens up, or be sitting at the drawing table and just draw and talk about what I'm working on and respond to you guys' questions and basically just hang out. So we're going to do that, and we're going to continue now with Jesse. So we've got a page up that he's coloring. He's working on the coloring phase. Well, basically, so Jesse, what app did you say you were using?
Yeah, I switched to I used to use GIMP just because I was an open source nerd. Virtually everything in all of my comics for 10 years has been based in open source. It was a combination of Scribus, Inkscape, GIMP, and a couple other utilities, and it's not necessarily open source, but occasionally I dive into Google SketchUp. I mean, Google SketchUp is free basically, but it's not. I don't think it's open source anymore. I still use it even on this book, but I switched to Clip Studio just because I ran into that typical open source issue of they do an upgrade, and that upgrade just completely screws my workflow in a certain way. In this case, it wasn't actually GIMP. It was that GIMP, although they upgraded and I put it on my main PC, my desktop, and that worked fine. But I really disliked my Cintiq at that point, because I just had the very first 12X or 12UX. Is that the model?
Yeah.
Really small Cintiq. And I had done my first issue on that, and it was really cramped. And I had since switched to which isn't much bigger, which makes no sense. But I bought a Surface Pro 4 in like 2017 just as a write-off. I had never owned a laptop. I don't like my phone.
Who's gonna draw their comics on their phone?
Yeah, I mean, just like I can't do that. And I used to have a Samsung tablet that I really liked, but it got drenched in kombucha. And I just deleted everything. I actually did comics layouts on it, and then I'd export the layouts to GIMP on my desktop to finish. I just loved the portability of it. So I bought the Surface Pro to be, the Surface Pro is pretty unique because it'll run web applications and desktop applications at the same time in the same space. Like Instagram, I used to be able to run Twitter, Instagram, and GIMP all at the same time. But GIMP, during an upgrade, because Microsoft Surface Pro is so much higher resolution than a normal like desktop PC, whatever, the interface has this unique resolution and whatever, that GIMP didn't redo their icons, and I couldn't read anything. It was like that old man syndrome where you're just squinting at the screen because you just can't focus on the type that's so small. I mean, it's a common complaint, older people have of a lot of newer technologies, that everything in any interface is just too small to read. I'm nearsighted anyway, big, thick glasses, don't give it away.
Hey,
so that really screwed me up.
LASIK, and I still ended up, having to get glasses in my 40s.
Yeah. Yeah, I considered LASIK pretty a while ago, but the success rate of it, I was in that category of people medically who have the highest rate of failure for LASIK. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm not doing that. No, but yeah, I switched to Clip Studio Paint. It's really cheap. People keep talking it up. I downloaded the trial, and I finished a page in less than a day. I was like, all right, this is, it's obviously like, I remember we talked about this before, in that it was a deal breaker for you that Clip Studio didn't work natively in CMYK. But for me, that was never really an issue since most of my comics are online first or digital first, so I would rather lean on the abilities of, its inherent sRGB compatibility than its CMYK compatibility. And I, just like you, I worked in print for decades, so I'm like, I know when a color is illegal, even if the program isn't telling me. Like you just learn, like, okay, that's an illegal color. I don't have to be told by the gamut warning that, this isn't going to print right.
Well, see, here's the first off, two things. One, I've realized now that I'm working in Procreate, and I think Procreate does have a CMYK mode, but since that's native RGB2, I realized I was kind of being a prima donna about that with Clip Studio Paint. So maybe I should give it another revisit at some point. But the other thing is that you, having worked in visual effects, have a natural affinity for a realistic palette and a naturalistic palette. Whereas
that's fair.
I color. Carl will joke about this because he's the first person who ever mentioned it. He says, I color like I'm using a bag of Skittles. So for me, CMYK was crucial because if possible, everything I'd use will be out of gamut.
Right.
So it was a way to restrict myself. And I'm like, I will make things as bright and vivid as I can within this sandbox. So it's just kind of like I had to hamstring myself in order to effectively do color pieces.
So that's not you. Let me ask this question, because I always thought for you that was a stylistic thing, that you wanted to go past, a naturalistic palette immediately, kind of differentiate what you were doing. Like I remember like really liking the colors you did on your the shared samurai thing that we did, that samurai petting zoo concept. I thought that was, and to this day, I actually think that's one of your stronger, or at least most appealing pieces of work.
But I appreciate that. Thank you. At some point, I do need to come back and revisit that world, since I only did the first chapter of that story. But before I answer that question, let me just give a quick shout out to some people, because I already see some of the regulars popped up in the chat. I just want to say hi to them. So I see Derek in the chat, and Amar is here, and Amar also mentioned that he's still using open source, but Clip Studio is his way to go. He and I talk a lot on tech and software. He's very up to speed on a lot of different resources he's using. And I also see Captain Spinny in the chat. So good, good to see you. And Amar also mentions for Clip Studio that they updated to the dark interface, and the UI is a lot better.
But, I'm using it right now. And I want to make a personal apology to Amar for our technical fumbling around yesterday. Well, sorry, dude. I know that was frustrating. Just hit the button, dummy. Oh my god.
Well, see, this is part of the thing is I wanted to do, honestly, Jesse, I thought of you as, this is a safe space. The idea of coming and trying these, working in something new in terms of streaming with guests. I said, let me do it with some friends where we can mess up, and it's not like, oh, I'm interviewing Bill Sienkiewicz and no one can hear him. Like, not that I would be interviewing Bill Sienkiewicz. That'd be awesome. But just the context of doing it in a safe arena with a friend, where if I screw up, it's something that's funny that we can joke about instead of someone actually being really angry. Or like, let's say I'm talking to somebody who's promoting a Kickstarter, and they're like, dude, look, my campaign ends in like 48 hours, and I'm trying to get the word out, and you're dicking around.
Yeah, you're fucking around.
So, but in answer to your question about palettes and color approach, don't think I've ever had a realistic sense of color. My color, I think, has always been really informed by comic books and obviously we are influenced by comics and video games. I mean, it's a large part of what we're doing. But I would say that my sense of color has always been over the top, hyper realistic, and not hyper realistic. Just over the top, surrealistic, really pop surrealistic colors. Like, just a lot of the content that I've consumed And I've been
going back to that. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead.
Just to reinforce that it really worked on that Samurai Petting Zoo project. I mean, it's color in the color space of a child's imagination kind of thing, and I always thought it was a really intentional art direction kind of choice.
Well, I think it was intentional in the sense that I was trying to make it like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah, that's
even yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad it came out like that. But even with that, I feel like it could have been a better execution of that kind of color space. And I probably should put out a one-shot issue of it, because I mean, a lot of people here don't necessarily even know what I'm talking about, unless, because I have to imagine the crossover, the audience for my live stream that's actually gone and picked up the Samurai book, even though it's linked on Amazon, is probably fairly small.
Right.
So, but yeah, I just to give you guys some background, I did a comic book series. Well, no, I was part of an anthology, which Jesse, that's sort of what Encoding Bushido grew out of, and he mentioned it on the previous episode.
Previous live stream, yeah.
Yeah, but it was called Samurai the Graphic Novel, and it was a heavy metal style anthology, just re-examining what the idea of samurai meant to us, and everyone brought in something different. Some were sci-fi stories, some were fantasy, some were horror. It was organized by our buddy Carl Altstetter, and my approach, my concept was to do a kid's story about a child who finds a samurai sword that is haunted in a museum. But when she frees the ghost spirit, the enemies who imprisoned his spirit in that sword are also awakened, and they start coming to hunt down this girl and to destroy his spirit once and for all. So now she becomes an ally against all of these demons and weird creatures. But
can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Were you aware of the Japanese concept that samurai swords and objects and all these other things are often, or at least in ancient times, were believed to be imbued with souls? I mean, it's a common thing in almost any ancient culture that objects, can be what do they call it? Repositories or reliquaries. But specifically in Japanese culture, in particular with swords and objects of great craftsmanship, there's the belief that they've been imbued with a soul.
I was not consciously aware of it. I want to say that I probably did. I'm sure I came across stories at some point growing up as a teenager with as many comics and stories as I read. And I did have a book on samurai culture just called Samurai Warrior. That was a reference book that I had since I was in high school. And I'm sure they probably had mentioned to it in there, but I didn't go back and look at those things when I was working on the story. So
just accidental genius.
Accidental,
I have to say,
the term genius.
I thought it was pretty brilliant. Like, oh, that's great. Taking this, kind of off, and not off-putting, but sort of an obscure aspect of Japanese culture and turning it into a kid's story. I remember thinking that actually because I was doing my own research and I remember that concept.
Now, most of I think what my research originally was reading through. It's funny that you mentioned the book Five Rings, because I did read it before I did the story, but I read it so long ago that none of that is present in my conscious.
Right.
So, but no, it was really just because most of the stuff I tend to write and draw is very dark, and it's not because I want to be. It's just that's what naturally comes out of me. So I said to myself, what would happen if I really tried to write something that was fun and upbeat and appropriate for kids? And that's sort of where the whole, the girl hitting people instead of killing them when they're hit with the sword, them an animal. Like, I'm like, what's just the most ridiculous thing I can think of? And then just make it a fun, make it a fun premise and go from there. So that's what I'm trying to do. I also see in the chat, Amar was saying that he has a few stories about samurai, a love story, and he also uses the concept of souls embedded in objects as a trope. So Yeah, that's apparently, like you said, it's a well-worn existing
Yeah,
concept. So
it's just not a layman's concept, and just in across the country, just like I said last time, like you ask them to define the word samurai, they're not gonna come up with servant,
yes,
it's not,
yeah. I mean, for me, it really is a lot of these things. I realize I've consumed enough pop culture over my life that a lot of these things just pop into my head subconsciously. Like for instance, I
yeah.
probably could have gotten the idea of the ghost being trapped in the sword. If anything, I think Frank Miller's Ronin is probably the most responsible thing for that, because I can't remember if the demon from that book was trapped in a sword or not. But Ronin obviously was a pretty influential samurai story for a lot of comic fans.
Yeah,
And
I have a special relationship with that book. Well, it's just the story. It's, I mean, in the United, since I moved to the United States, the land of plenty.
mhm.
Growing up on Guam, that book was harder to get than platinum. You
Damn.
know, it was just, you couldn't. There were no comic book stores. There were no. I had that. This is funny. This is what I had to do in order to get that book. I had to look up in because there was no internet either. I had to look up in a telephone book in a library whether or not there was a comic book store in Hawaii that would send it to me. Right.
Damn.
So and here's the other thing, I couldn't, long distance was even long distance phone calls also were difficult.
Mhm.
Right. They would cost you like $20 for a minute. Right. There was no fiber. There were no cables laid at the time. And I couldn't, I would have had to write them a letter, wait for them to reply, and then wait for it to be yes or no, then send them another letter with like a cashier's check or something, some acceptable denomination to buy the book. Right. And I didn't want to do that. I was like, it's all or nothing. Right. So I asked my mom, like, yeah, what does it take to get a cashier's check? And I just wrote out an amount. I think it was like $10.
Mhm.
And writing them a letter. It's like, I live on Guam. There's no comic book stores. If you have this book, please take this check. If not, take the check anyway. I don't care. Like I was basically giving away free money. And it would have covered shipping. Snail mail. Sure enough, 3 months later, I get the book. And I did that even for the first. That was actually the second time I did that.
Mhm.
So I felt, lucky, that it worked. But the first time was actually to get Bill Sienkiewicz's Moon Knight.
You know what? I've never gotten. I still haven't read that to this date. As much as I love
Really?
his work.
Oh man, as soon as he got, kind of, I don't know whether it was permission or whether he just did it and nobody was watching, but when he turned it more to his, emerging style, that's when it really took off. Because his initial take on a lot of things was very, by his own admission, was him doing Neil Adams.
Yeah. I think and he just got sick of that style and was like, I want to do my own thing now.
Yeah, I'd like to, well, it was just like anybody, when you're young, you're finding your own way. And as much as I know he still loves Neil Adams, it's like, he started he was living in New York. You get exposed to the art community there, and he's been part of that for years. So, as a painter and illustrator, like it would only naturally affect the guy. Like, hey, I wonder if this would look cool in a comic. Like this, whatever Bob Peak style, splatter, technique or whatever he wanted to try. So no, it's just funny. As far as like how far did you go to get your comics as a kid? I had to go, basically 12,000 miles.
So much more than climbing uphill in the snow to get a Fantastic Four.
Yeah, I had to deal with the vagaries of banks, telecommunications, and
You're literally, it's like the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula. You're like, I have crossed oceans of time.
Like,
Frank Miller's Ronin.
Yeah, even into college, I remember asking. I even remember his name, Ken. Mm-hmm. This great one of the the Mr. Popular kind of guy in school. That's who Ken was. His dad was like a police chief or something, but he was a real popular guy. And I remember he used to regularly fly to Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I told him, hey, if I give you $20, pop into a comic book store and pick this up. It was over the summer vacation, we're not going to see each other for months. And I was like, yeah, man, no problem. When we get back, I'll let you know. I had forgotten, that I gave him any money, but I just had, kind of a crappy summer. And I was like, oh, well, let's go back to school. This will be nice, change of pace and get back into it. Right. The first day we're in the cafeteria, sitting down to have breakfast and shoot the shit about classes and who's got classes together and whatever. He opens up his duffel bag, plonks down the books, and I'm like, holy shit.
Well, what else did he bring you besides Ronin?
No. Ronin was that was earlier in college. I asked him to get me again. It was Bill Shinkevich's. It was his the Classics Illustrated Moby Dick.
Oh,
I asked him because there was no way that was coming to Guam. Just even on no newsstands. By then, all the newsstands comics were gone. Everything was gone. But there had cropped up a few people who would bring in comics, but they could only afford to bring in mainstream stuff. Because that's where the numbers were.
Like much of the comic industry.
Well, even to a much greater degree, though, because the shipping on a single book to Guam at the time was obscene. Mm-hmm. You were literally paying like, if cover price back then was like $1.25, you were paying like $10 or something stupid, just to bring that book in. It was like, and so everything was bagged and sold at overstreet prices and whatever. And I was like, geez, this is no way to sustain a collection. So I had to be really selective about what I was ordering and what I wasn't. So Classics Illustrated, that was worth it. So I gave him the money, and there it was.
That is pretty awesome. I'm trying to think of what the most, because I remember when I got my copy of Ronin, the basically I had just heard that a comic book shop that was like one town over from the town I grew up in, there was a comic book shop that I had just never been to before, and they were having a sale. I don't think it was like a going out of business, like a fire sale, but
it's like back issue stuff.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where it's like they were having one of those huge like stuff that would be not necessarily high quality wall books, but like everything in the back issue bins was like, from $0.25 to $1, and like maybe
I love those sales.
Exactly. They were just blowing stuff out. And so I went down there, I went through the back issues, but I was going through on the walls, and they'd had Ronin. And at this point, I'm trying to remember what Frank Miller stuff I had read, because this was, I don't know if Sin City maybe Sin City had just barely started being published in but I'm trying to remember what it was that I had already read of Frank Miller's that said, oh, I need to get Ronin, because I'd already been exposed to his work.
It would have been Dark Knight Returns. Oh no, Ronin was pre Dark Knight Returns, right?
Yeah. Actually, no, I think that's what it was. Is the sale, the era when the sale came out was when Dark Knight Returns had already been published. I had bought Dark Knight Returns and was like, okay, I need more. And so while I happened to be at the sale, I was looking around and I saw Ronin, and I was just like, oh yeah, I heard about this. Just his repetition preceded him, because at that point I don't think I had read the Daredevil stuff. And when he had returned to Daredevil writing for other people, I'm trying to think. Maybe I had read. Let's see. No, I think I had read Batman Year One. So I think I was really exposed to Miller as a writer first.
Right. Oh wow. Yeah, that's weird. Yeah. Or not weird, but that's my opposite. I was familiar with the Daredevil stuff. Then Dark Knight, or then Ronin, and then Dark Knight.
I mean, I might be conflating and getting my timelines backwards, because it feels like Year One might have come out after Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, that was after, yeah.
So I think I might be getting my timelines mixed up. Whatever it was,
you could have experienced it just asynchronously, like
yeah.
Yeah, it may have come out first, but I didn't read it first, and it happens to everybody. So
yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, it was weird because I'd started reading comics in the I want to say like 1989 was when I started going to my local shop regularly.
right.
And so basically, I was reading all the books in the 90s. So I was like reading the rise of the image creators before they left. But like I've been reading like I want to say like Norm Brayfogle was doing a lot of Batman stuff. Him and Kelly Jones, like in that era, like right before Nightfall. Like I want to say one of the first Batman books I bought off the newsstand was A Lonely Place in Dying, which was the fallout from
oh yeah,
the fallout from Death in the Family.
Yeah.
And I remember buying that. So that is my first Batman comic book off of the newsstand, other than either listening to Power Records as a kid or watching the Batman Adam West show. And I read this, I'm all, this is depressing as shit. Like, this was so sad.
I always have you're talking about our first experiences of various things, but and here's another nerd adversity story. Mm-hmm. That in order to watch, I didn't have cable television when I was in college. I just couldn't afford it. All right. Mm-hmm. By the time I was in college, you had to pay, God, I forget what it was, $30 a month or whatever. And, there was no way my family was going to pay, $30 a month for just crappy cable television, which when you lived on Guam, it was just tape delay from Southern California. So nothing was live. They would just fully record, television shows here and then air them there. That's it.
Cable was bootleg in Guam.
Yeah, it was. And, a friend of mine worked at the television station that was carrying Batman of the Animated Series. Mm-hmm. So she would sneak us, me, her boyfriend, and whoever into one of the tape ops rooms and then pop in the tapes of Batman the Animated Series so we could watch it. And we were also broke, right? We'd go to like Burger King for like, what is it, 35-cent burgers and whatever, or tacos at Taco Bell. And, we'd cram into the tape ops room around those tiny, what do they call them?
The view, just the monitor.
Yeah, the actual viewing monitor. It wasn't a television set. It was like they're only like 6 inches wide. They're not meant for actual viewing. They're just meant okay, there's something on the tape. You don't have to watch it for quality. It's just for basic viewing. It's like 6 inches across. We're all huddled around this tiny monitor watching Batman the Animated Series.
Oh man, that must have actually been hard.
It was hilarious. It was fun. Because we loved the show. We just. It's like, hey guys, you want to watch Batman? We got a new tape in. They're like, yeah, man. Like, I'll bring tacos and whatever leftover food I had from home. You make a night of it. It was genuinely hilarious. So,
well, plus, I mean, it's got to be nice to watch that show as like a group event, because for some reason, like even though friends at school when I was a kid were into it. Like, really, it was like when I would come home, I'd either be watching it by myself or my older brother would be hanging out. And my older brother, at this point, had started college, but was still enough of a fan of cool stuff that he'd watch a cartoon with me if it was something cool. But he was like, why are you freaking out about this show? I'm like, just watch the opening sequence.
Yeah, the opening's dope. Man, like, whatever.
Oh, I see a few more people popped up in the chat. I see Nighthawk Warrior. Good to see you, man. We're just talking comics and drawing here. But yeah, it just, and I remember when they got into the Robin's Reckoning episode, the famed one where Robin, Dick Grayson Robin is like, no, we found the guy who killed my parents and I'm going to hunt him down and kill him.
Yeah.
So that's got to like talk him down from that.
I was like, what? Yeah. By that time, I think I had left Guam, though. Mm-hmm. Like it really didn't take long. I forget what year that was exactly. 95, 96 or something like that, where we were actually getting that programming. And then, like a lot of television stations, I have told this story. I think I said this last time that Star Trek, The Next Generation, the finale, never aired back home because they were like, oh, the show's too expensive, we're not going to carry it, right at the finale, and everybody's like, oh.
It's
They
like
never
there would
showed
be
the
government
finale.
outroar because of that.
What's that?
You think there would be government outroar at the government because of that, like demanding
Well,
that
no, private industry, the television stations are privately owned, and they can carry whatever they want or don't want. And, because of the expense, and it was like, yeah, we can't carry that anymore. They're charging too much for it. Because at that time, they had to start paying for the programming from Southern California. And it was like,
oh, they weren't doing bootleg anymore. That's what happened.
Yeah.
If they just
You're not
kept
getting it for free anymore, pal. So yeah, just like that series, you had the adversity of being a nerd on a tropical island growing up. It's like, don't get attached to a television program because it might go away. It's worse than it being canceled. It's, oh no, we're not going to show it to you because we can't afford it.
Yeah, I mean, just being one of those Southern California, one of those kids who was getting the Southern California shows, I can't remember if there was anything that just totally, that I was into that just up and disappeared before it ended.
Yeah.
So I lucked out in that sense.
Yeah, they call it the land of plenty for a reason. It's I kind of even today kind of marvel at what's available to you. Just as a regular consumer, compared to what I grew up with. It's like just today, I had somebody deliver my groceries. Like, Jesus, that's something, when you're growing up, that's something rich people did. Like, bring my groceries. It wasn't just a thing you could order on the internet. Very strange times.
Yes, strange days, very much so.
Which was one of the last movies I remember seeing in a theater before I left home.
See, that was one I saw it actually at work because I worked at a DVD menu design company when I was in college, and that was one of the ones that I think they actually won awards for.
The production of the DVD.
Yeah, for the production of that DVD. But they did the DVD menus for that. And as they were working, I'm like, oh, I never saw this when it came out. And I was like, all right. So we were just watching it around lunch, and that makes for some awkward. Lunchtime work.
You're like, hey, could you pass me the ketchup over there?
Yeah.
That is it's a pretty classic film, though. I mean, as far as conceptually, there's aspects of that film I really enjoy.
Was that Catherine Bigelow?
I don't remember. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, I want to say it is. Some other people in the chat were mentioning. I see Roper Art said Sci-Fi Channel used to do that a lot, where they would have a series that they were running, and then just not show the end. Which
hello, I worked on one of those shows,
yes,
Caprica.
Yes, for those who don't know, it was Defiance, right?
No, Caprica. That was the show that we started. They started airing, and then they only aired, I think, 6 episodes, and said, hell with the rest. So, like, everyone I was talking to, like, what the hell happened to that show? I'm like, they just stopped airing it.
See, I was watching it. I want to say this might have been back when Hulu was still broadcasting stuff that was like not like if you didn't have a cable subscription, they were still airing.
Yeah.
And it was way before there was a Hulu app, so there was no watching it on your phone. You were just watching it on your laptop. Because I remember that's how I watched the final season of Battlestar, and I think I was watching Caprica that way too.
Yeah, that was the show that really made me the most angry, because I think I had invested way too much personally into just the performances of things, because like I was responsible for all the character animation on that show. Like all of it, right? There were no junior animators, there were no setup people. There was nobody. I was doing all the characters, all the robots, and by the end of it, they had this giant, of course, Rock'em Sock'em Robot's a giant melee robot invasion kind of thing that, I put a lot of work into, and everybody was by the time I think we actually ran out of money, like budget wise, to do it because it was just that ambitious.
I think I recall talking to you back in that era and you just being frustrated because you were actually like, look, let me work for another hour or two on this. Like you were really trying to make it like the best thing you produced at that point.
Yeah, it definitely was. There's a lot of there's a lot of secret sauce in that show that no one that even today I haven't talked to anybody about. There's actually you remember here's my favorite hidden or what do they call them Easter eggs?
Yeah.
All right, this is a long story, so I'll make it as quick as possible. Everybody watched The Exorcist, right? The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the demon that inhabits Linda Blair had a name, right? It was Pazuzu, like god of the eastern wind or something like that, like an Egyptian god, Pazuzu.
Mm-hmm.
My boss at the time, the CG supervisor for Caprica, worked with Dick Smith, and Dick Smith did the makeup for Linda Blair in The Exorcist. He did the Captain Howdy Pazuzu makeup. When we were working on Caprica had a concept that there was only one true God. There was a religion. These people who believed in it were the terrorists in the show, and they worshiped the one true God. Me and Doug, my boss, Doug Drexler, Academy Award winning Doug Drexler, he came up with the idea that the one true God was Pazuzu. That was our contribution. So he gave me the concept art for Pazuzu as the Egyptian god had the wings, a snake for a tail, and he looked kind of like a cherubic devil, or cherubic devil, cherubic. Excuse me. But
poor pronunciation is a running theme here. You're good.
Yeah. But I sculpted Pazuzu to put in the chapel of the one true God. And if you watch, I think it's episode 112 or the 11th or 12th episode of Caprica, you can see it clearly at the head of the chapel of the one true God. It's Pazuzu.
That's dope.
So it's really deep, like you have to be a fan of both, Battlestar Galactica and The Exorcist and Dick Smith to get that in joke,
That's a pretty broad Venn diagram. There's probably a lot of crossover there.
Well, just we did it just for ourselves. Like nobody really cared. Well, that's not true. Like a lot of people invested a lot in that show, but we were the ones who had to come up visually with it. Well, what does this place look like? So I designed the shell of the chapel, and then it was Doug's idea. And like he pitched it to me. I was like, hell yeah, man, that's a great idea.
Hey, you know what? Speaking of that, some question from the chat. The first question is just whether you've tried using the animation feature in Clip Studio Paint, and so first off, your thoughts on that, and then maybe if you want to talk about what you usually use as your go-to apps when you are animating.
Well, I use I'm a 3D animator primarily. So when I need to do 2D animation, I'll usually, the Office pays for the After Effects suite. And so I can just draw stuff, keyframe it in After Effects, do my own assemblies and whatever. I don't use Clip Studio Pro for animation just because it's not used at the studios where I've worked. But otherwise I would, but my go-to 2D animation tool, I'd have to say, is still After Effects, just because it's a pipeline dependent thing. You're working with compositors, you're working with other footage. If you're working with live action footage, in some of the spaces and studios where I was working, Universal, a couple of jobs for Warner Brothers, MFX Studio, other places, you have to fit into their pipeline. And granted, Clip Studio exports, any number of there's a train, it'll export anything into any pipeline. People want to be standardized about things for licensing purposes and budgeting. So, it's the most mundane and, non-art related things that become the rationale for whether or not you use a certain tool. I would use it in a heartbeat in a studio, if that was the tool of choice. But, Clip Studio, was born from Manga Studio, and originally a lot of it, even today, does not function in English. Like the hyphenation tables, they all have menus and everything seems like it's in English, but hyphenation tables, when you're working with text, it doesn't work.
Mhm.
Like I haven't read anything where there are new features that fix that issue, the English language issues. So that might be a stumbling block for some places to use it, but as far as I know, nobody's adopting it anytime soon as an enterprise-wide tool. But I use Maya, for animation, visual effects. I have used Lightwave. I have used Softimage a long time ago. Nobody knows what Softimage is anymore.
Oh no, I remember. Wait, was Softimage the one that became Electric Pencil or spun out of Electric Pencil?
Oh, you mean Electric Image?
Electric Image. I could have sworn there was a program called Electric Pencil that this is back to those DVD menu days that we had a couple of
no, totally different program.
Squad.
No, it's a totally different program.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But I do remember the name of Softimage.
Yeah, it was a friend of mine. My friend Dean Bakey likes to, it's his test for whether or not you're a true animator or an old true animator is if you say Softimage and not soft image, because that's how it's spelled. And he was born, I guess the company of origin was Canadian or French Canadian. So the pronunciation is Softimage. Here's that pronunciation thing again. Instead of, you use soft image, and like Dean would like, oh, you're not a real animator.
Okay, I must have been working with real animator nerds at the time because they use the Softimage. And I'm like, I just image.
Yeah,
soft image. I'm like, she's Sadie.
Yeah, so soft image sounds very Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. This is our new suite, soft image. Like, oh, cool, tech sounding. Software and image. That's what it sounds like. No, it's soft image. Like fromage. I always thought that was funny. Like he makes fun of people for saying that. But yeah, that's my workflow in a nutshell. I do think I've seen people do unbelievable stuff with, and of course there are a lot of Japanese production studios that standardize on Clip Studio for some productions, I believe.
Animation studios?
I think so, yeah. Like
IG, the people that do Ghost in the Shell, something like that?
No, I don't think IG. Smaller studios, or at least what you would call a boutique studio. I think, I'd have to look that up. I'm talking out of school, but I swear I've seen that on the literature for Clip Studio, that there are places that. Was that?
It's the selling point.
Yeah. Like, oh, you use what the big boys use. Like, that's, that's a point of contention for me for many years that, there's a lot of snobbery around particular tools, like, and I got to tell you, if your work doesn't look good, I don't care what you use, your work doesn't look good. If your work looks great, I care in so much as I can hire you or not, But I've seen people, take the plunge, oh, this guy doesn't use the same tool we do, but I don't care because his or her sensibility and style is just that strong. So.
Well, plus, if you're somebody who's doing something that's literally that remarkable, and it's sort of like, this is an aesthetic that we want to bring into our company, it might be something where you might look at it and it's like, hey, we're going to explore this guy's workflow.
Right. It's rare, especially in visual effects. And visual effects people in general are like the high point of, you either use our tools or get out, I hate to say that, but
that's
it is actually true.
Design or artistic jobs, any type of corporate creative job, that's pretty much the standard.
I have to say that it wasn't always like that. Like I worked at in the early 2000s, I worked at Rhythm and Hues, but I worked in the commercial division of Rhythm and Hues, which was one of the places that standardized on some software internally. But the rest of the studio, they wrote most of their own software. They had their own. It was they were the I believe it wasn't Wavefront.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to really look this up. My memory fails. It's like 25 years ago for some of these people. But Rhythm and Hughes was one of the companies that merged with some of the software that eventually became Maya. It became Alias Wavefront, and eventually Maya.
Mm-hmm.
Those companies were offshoots from the separation of the companies that, kind of these guys went to with Rhythm and Hughes, and these guys went to be their own thing and became, eventually Alias and all this other stuff. But all of them had, similar angles and technology and software knowledge, and, Rhythm and Hughes for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
They don't use it as much today. They've standardized just like everybody else on, off the shelf products. But back then, even when I was working there, they were writing, and deploying their own software for 3D and to a degree for compositing. So, back then they were like, oh yeah, this guy's got an amazing stuff of a kind, of a like, digital or otherwise. Let's bring them in, see if we can train them. They've graduated from this particular school for animation. Let's see if they, can fit in with the pipeline and whatever. Because they, one of their standard practices back in that time, if you were going to work on the studio side, and I went to the commercial side because I knew all that software, the commercial software. But if you were working on the studio side, the film side, you spent your entire first month or two, maybe 3 months, depending on what you were going to do, training on the software. And I would see these guys, all the new guys, marching in and out of this one room, and they're like, "Oh yeah, those are the guys for who are going to work on the next film." But all they're doing is training on the Unix boxes, running shell commands, and doing all the other esoteric stuff. And you got to do this to get to your files, and here's how we do things. And the woman who ran that program also was like one of the nicest people at the studio, because her office was around the corner from our offices. I think her name was Kathy, and she would walk in every once in a while with coffee and chit chat and whatever. Oh yeah, the new crop of students, they came from this, that, and whatever school, and those are just good times, like I remember. So, you still there?
I am still here. I was just I'm sort of moving some pieces around on the thing that I was drawing.
Okay.
Well, also, we are pretty much a little bit past 1 o'clock, which
Wow.
I've been keeping this short. But I got to tell you, considering that you have some great stories, first off, anytime that I'm streaming and you want to hop on, I'll include to toss you in. But you've got a lot of great visual effects stories. You might want to think about starting up a YouTube channel and just streaming and sharing some of your stories while you're working.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Decent enough idea. A bunch of guys are doing that now, which they've got better stories and more stories than I do. And some of the stories I would not feel comfortable telling.
Well, of course, there's certain, you want to leave the buried bodies buried.
Yeah. And I know people have plenty of stories about me, so I'm like, screw that, I'm out.
Payback is a mofo.
Yeah. All right, man. There's another fun one.
Okay. Y'all, if you want to check out Jesse's stuff, Zeus Toves on Instagram and Twitter. For me, jeremy.net is the homepage, and I'll include links to the rest of my social media in the comments. Patreon.com/GERIMI, newsletter.jeremy.net, and Amazon.jeremy.net for my bookstore. And so we're going to go back. I've got another live stream scheduled this weekend. I'm going to be having the guys from Crypto Comics on as a guest. And then after that, we're probably going to be returning to the every other week. So 1 week live stream, 1 week will be a time lapse, and we'll go back and forth like that for a while. We'll see. Maybe I'll have some more lunchtime special surprises. We'll play it by ear. But Jesse, again, thanks for joining me again. It's a good time as always. It's good just to catch up and just BS.
Yeah.
So,
and I felt that wasn't just my head like this while I was drawing the whole time.
I gotta tell you, I've just been because I was pretty much in coffee and comics mode. I was literally just drawing and listening to you talk. I did a very poor job. I checked the chat, but I wasn't checking to make sure that we were in frame. Our heads could have been completely the entire time. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. But guys, everyone who's in the chat, thank you so much for watching. Sorry I didn't get a chance to get more into the chat conversations, but we answered a few questions. So guys, again, thank you for watching. That's it for now. Go be creative.
Later.